Does regulation actually drive better risk management, better security, or is it a checkbox stopgap measure?
If that's all you're doing, driving to be compliant, that's where I think regulations become dangerous.
I hate regulation. I think the only benefits for regulations are the consulting companies and the audit companies.
I've been studying threat actors for a very, very long time. I know their mindset. They don't give, what do you say? Give an ass about.
A rat's tushy.
Yeah, they don't care about your certification.
Regulations, for the most part, have gotten to the point where the risk is no longer about the underlying problem. It is about, are we going to be found wanting in an audit?
How does that help? Is that going to make everybody afraid? Now we're regulating by fear?
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to today's episode of Third Party. Today we're going to talk about Bob's favorite topic. and I'm being serious, unfortunately. Nice shirt, by the way, Bob. Is that new?
Yeah, it is, actually.
We are talking about regulation. We've talked about it before. We've alluded to it. We've talked around it. We've talked in it. But today we're going to spend the entire time talking about regulation. So let me posit something and we'll go from there. And we've talked about this before. Does regulation actually drive better risk management, better security, or is it a checkbox stopgap measure?
Yes.
Well, and that's a wrap.
It's not a simple answer, but it does. I think it's both sides of the coin. Ultimately, it drives cybersecurity improvement. Because the good thing about most regulation, I think, is that it's fairly generic. It's not too prescriptive and specific, because as soon as they do that, then it's out of date and it's worthless. But it gives people...
Well, you think it isn't, or you think it shouldn't be too prescriptive?
No, I don't think it should be too prescriptive.
Okay, but it is in a lot of cases.
Most of the regulations that are coming out now aren't as prescriptive as you think. They give general terms that you think they're prescriptive, but there's no definition to the terms. They're open to interpretation. There's always something open to interpretation in the regulations. And that's realistic because you can't regulate every possibility. Nobody knows every possibility. But if you do zero regulation, well, then why do we have to do anything?
Free for all.
Yes. So there's that balance. That's why I say it's both sides of the coin. And sometimes, I think that companies that are looking at, well, how do we meet the regulatory requirements and still be secure? They develop new programs. They develop new companies come out to help innovate in that area because it's not going to go away. The regulated industries, it's not going to go away. So it's really both.
Ferhat, what do you think?
Well, it's, how do you call it in English? It's necessary evil? No. It's like a necessary evil. You hate to live with that, but you cannot live without it, right? We have to have regulations. Zero regulation is worse than some regulation, but there should be a balance, as Bob said. There are some regulations very out of date. We checked yesterday, right? The major update on HIPAA was
2015 or 2013?
2013.
Yeah, right.
Yes, 2013. Of course, there are some updates. I think this year in 2025 they also did some updates, but the major one was in 2013. And now the technological era is very dynamic. There are so many things going on the AI space, and when you check the AI policies published by the governments, especially in European Union, they are not prescriptive, and that's by design. And I like that. I think in Italy, they published a policy that it actually encourages using AI with certain guardrails, but they are not putting too much descriptive notion of those guardrails. And I like it. I think it's going in the right direction, but the regulations that we have right now, they need to be updated very quickly, and they need to be less descriptive possible, right?
Yeah, the big challenge I see with the regulations is, and you just pointed out with HIPAA, it's 2013, was it? Yeah.
That's like 100 years ago.
Yeah. And yeah,
I'm not that good at math anymore. I
yeah,
used to be.
but it feels like 100 years anyway. But you look at that. There's at the time, those were the guidelines, and they were probably close. I'm not saying they're all perfect, but and that's the problem we have is that we put those guidelines in place, and that's what people work to. That they're not if you're looking to be HIPAA compliant or now PCI is not a regulation, but it's a contractual obligation, but you're still driving to be PCI compliant. It drives your program, and if that's all you're doing, driving to be compliant, that's where I think regulations become dangerous.
All right. So I'm going to be a little controversial. I hate regulation. I think the only benefits for regulations are the consulting companies and the audit companies. I don't feel any safer because of HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley or PCI or DORA or any of these regulations. We talked about it yesterday off camera, but regulations for the most part have gotten to the point where the risk is no longer about the underlying problem. It's no longer about maintaining resilience or business or data, protecting data. It is about, are we going to be found wanting in an audit? And I will share a story with you. A bunch of years ago, I consulted with a company that does back-end processing for banks. They don't have any PII. They don't have any personal financial information. And the auditors came in and said, you need to encrypt your backup tapes. And I had a call with them, and I looked at all their mitigating and compensatory controls, and I said, honestly, I don't see any risk here that you don't encrypt your backup tapes. They said, let's get the auditors on the phone. Spoke to the auditors nodded their head. Next day, a guy called me, still have to encrypt our backup tapes. Why? That just does not make any sense to me. So maybe what I hate about regulations is they're written by people that don't understand the underlying technology. And I think that could be fixed, right? Let's actually bring in security and risk experts to do that. But I just find regulations to be a way to free up budget, but I don't think for the most part they provide any value.
Well,
Please don't come after me.
I get what you're saying, and I think the regulation that you're talking about was too prescriptive. If you're talking about backup tapes, that's too prescriptive.
Yes.
And it's out of date, obviously. And I hate regulations as well, but I think some regulation is necessary. I've been around too long, and I've seen it that if there is no regulation, if it's the wild, wild west, most people will take advantage of that because companies, the bottom line for companies are, what's the share price, what's the return to the shareholder, what's the ARR, and a lot of CISOs are in environments where that can be a little bit challenging when everything is focused on that. But regulations give you a little bit of power, and again, they can be horrible. They can be a disaster, and if you drive towards only compliance, your program is short-sighted.
It's crap.
Yeah, that.
Well, if you ask any CISO if they like regulations or if they hate regulations, they will say that they hate regulations, but they need them because that gives them the budget that they need, right? Otherwise, they will have a hard time in budget conversations. But when they say that, hey, we have to be compliant, we are in this heavily regulated industry, I need that money. What you talk about is that if a CISO or someone responsible for these regulatory duties in the company, if their goal become appeasing the auditors instead of making the system resilient, then that's the problem.
Yeah,
I just feel like that's what we've gotten to, though. Right? I just feel like there's just an abstraction and a layer removed. I just don't think the underlying risks are being addressed in most of the regulation. And you're right. Some of them are definitely better than others. And I think we've learned some lessons like from Sarbanes-Oxley as an example, which caused a lot of overhead. It was very onerous. And frankly, I don't think it actually solved the problem that it was supposed to solve. HIPAA, we've talked about healthcare and the challenges there. And I just find it frustrating, having run programs and now being on the vendor side and spending a bunch of time as sort of an outside-in sort of viewer, Bud's person as an analyst, I don't see things getting better because of the regulation. And I do agree with you that companies and people are selfish and they will do what's best for them unless they are forced to do otherwise. I just feel like we haven't gotten there.
But we got something better, right? Consider HIPAA. I pronounce it HIPAA, but I think HIPAA is the right
HIPAA, yeah.
Okay.
HIPAA, hypa, potato.
So for HIP, if there's no HIPAA, most of the hospitals, they will not even appoint a security person, right?
Right. Here's the problem, though. When HIPAA
I
was
know.
new, here's what they did. Hey, you over there in the red shirt, you don't look like you're that busy. You're now in charge of security. And by the way, you got no money and no people. That's not helpful.
But
Well,
now
it's a
got-
start.
It was a
Yeah, it's a
start. I mean, it was a negative start, but it's a start.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, they were here, then they appointed someone, right? So now they have some budget. It's going up. I know it's not getting better for the maybe last 5 years.
And I'm being somewhat hyperbolic and controversial on purpose
I
because
can't
this-
imagine that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because this is something we were talking about offset, but let's kind of shift a little bit.
Well, before you do, think about it. Third party regulations around third party. They've only really been in the financial industry, and there are some extremely large companies that have extremely immature third party risk management programs. Simply because there was no regulatory requirement, and this is 20 years after the regulators started telling the banks they needed to assess third parties. It's made it even longer. And simply because of recent changes and problems in the supply chain, those unregulated industries are now going, oh, it's really bad. Maybe we better do something. So if everybody was in the same boat and there was no innovation over the last 25 years in third-party risk management, everybody would be starting from scratch. So if you look at it from that lens, yeah, it's horrible. Nobody likes regulations. You're right. Compliance is a baseline, but it starts. Everything has to start somewhere. You can't start with a perfect program. You have to begin, and that person, and I know the person you're talking about at a healthcare system I used to work for.
I know a lot of those people.
Hi, Charlie. How you doing?
Yeah, they're all real unhappy now.
I think he's retired now. He's happy. But I get to look at, I remember the look in his face when that happened. He's like, why me? But he grew into it, and the program grew into it. And over time, it became a very good program. So it's got to start somewhere.
One of the challenges, I think, is on the enforcement side, right? So it's the difference between oversight, overreach, enforcement. How far should the regulators go? Like we talked about sort of behavioral regulation, right? So rather than you must encrypt your backup tapes using AES 256, right? We agree that's too prescriptive. But the opposite extreme is you've got to protect your data, which is not enough. It doesn't tell what people do. Like we saw it with NYDFS as a great example. The first version of that was so behavioral it wasn't really implementable, and they found a middle ground, and I think they did.
So you mean that an annual pen test and continuous monitoring aren't the same thing?
They are not. They are not. Well, continuous is a great example. What does continuous mean?
Nobody's still defined that.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I had a call yesterday with a prospective client, and they asked about real time. I said real time's not actually a thing.
Yeah.
We can get near real time. We can get as close to real time as the data allows. But again, that comes back to the how well the regulations are created and written. So where do we draw the line between oversight, overreach, enforcement? You better, or we're going to punish you, we're going to fine you. I think ultimately a lot of it comes back to accountability. How bad is the punishment if people don't comply?
It can be pretty bad, depending on the regulation. And I think the problem I see with that is something I learned when I was in law enforcement. There's something called the letter of the law and something called the spirit of the law. And I think,
Ooh, spirit.
yeah, but it's a real thing. It's what was the purpose of the law? The purpose of the regulation is to protect your data. And given a fine that's a maximum fine that's what's the spirit of that? It's the letter of the law, but how does that help? Is that going to make everybody afraid? That we're regulating by fear. If we're not compliant, we're going to get a fine. It's going to put us out of business. There has to be that balance there. There's to make the regulatory world a little bit more acceptable. But that's especially GDPR fines. Some of those were huge. It's crazy.
And the companies don't seem to be getting any better.
Yeah.
They keep getting hit. You see the same companies keep getting hit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the fines and punishments, they are deterrents, right? So they, like you,
Are they?
the purpose of them are deterrents, but there is the other side of it. Threat actors, they also know that. I know some ransomware groups during the negotiations, they said that, hey, there are some, European Union citizens information here. You will be fined by GDPR, which is 2% of your annual revenue, and I am asking only half of it. So they are using that as a negotiation chip now.
And I've used those screenshots you had actually in a presentation talking about sort of evolution of ransomware, how they're running it like a business. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that, and I think both of you have alluded to this, the regulations are not keeping up with the technology. They're just not. We took HIPAA 13 years ago, 12 years ago? Well, 13 because it's 2026 now, sort of. How do we do that? Like I used to review a lot of policy for clients when I was at my last job, and I would look and I would see, oh, you can't use zip drives. Holy crap, zip drives. Zip drives have been around for 20 years. So that's a case where the policy couldn't keep up with the technology. So how do the regulators, and how do we work with regulators? Because, we're involved. We respond to the call for comments for these things. How do regulators keep up with the headlong technology, especially with AI now?
So in Canada right now, for the finance industry, there are some regulations in place, especially around AI. They are, I'm not sure if they are quite prescriptive, but the finance industry in Canada, they freaked out. So now their AI governance committees, they question everything. I mean, everything. They said that, hey, if anything changed in your LLM model, you need to let us know. Every day it changes.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I mean, there is no way that you can keep up with it. So apparently, whoever wrote those regulations or policies, they don't know this technology, and that should change, right? They need to keep up with the technology. They cannot do that by putting prescriptive items, items into place.
So yeah, you're right. It's prescriptive versus more generic, that spirit. But it's funny you say about these, because one of the new regulations around AI, they are prolific. About a year and a half ago, I was looking at how many different governments, different entities brought out some type of framework around AI, because third-party assessments, you have to assess that. And what's the most efficient way to do that? And I found 15 or 16. And your research group, since then, you've been looking, and the last I talked to you guys
More than 50.
It was 51.
It's definitely going to get worse. We're going to see more and more, right? You see in country, you see region.
Industry.
Well, wait until in the U.S. There's no national framework at all, and we have 25 states that all have. California has one now. California has an AI assessment.
You can't get a
process.
national privacy strategy in place in the U.S.
Right. So that's the problem. We're going to be adding more and more and more of these frameworks. So that's some of the work that I've worked with your folks in research, is how do we be more efficient around that? So we have an opportunity now with AI. Maybe we can take that work and look backwards at all the other frameworks that might be something that's efficient. But essentially, the concept is, let's use AI that can monitor, can watch all the different frameworks in the world as they get published, as they change, well, what's common between them? If you look at all the different things and all the different frameworks that if you're trying to be compliant with one of the frameworks, you might have 90 or 120 different things that you need to have on a checklist. But then if you're doing business in, let's say, Europe and Australia, okay, now you have multiple, and now you add, another 150 from Australia, and before you know it, you're trying to comply with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Some of which
things.
conflict, some of which ask for the same thing, but at different levels, like difference between shall, should, must.
Well, a lot of them, I don't think there's a lot of conflict, but I think there's more commonality, and it's the way they're stated. But ultimately, they're looking for evidence of a specific control around AI, whether it's implemented, whether it's working, or whether it's not, and being able to automatically put that all together and have a reasonable living type of thing. And I think that's the biggest challenge is that that I see with it is that it's going to be living and it's going to change. And most folks in third-party risk management, oh, but I built all my questionnaire set on what you gave me last week. You say you're going to change it in 3 months. That means I have to change my process. So
right, and then you got to change the policy, and then the policy's got to go for approval, and it's got to go in front of the board, and it's just this endless cycle. So I want to pull on something because you kind of said something and you glossed over it. Do you think that we can use AI to monitor the ongoing regulatory landscape and then turn that inward and help us better create these frameworks?
yes, we're doing it.
We can and we are.
Okay, because you said that, you kind of glossed over it, which
Yeah.
I think it's an important concept, and I agree. Here's the question then, what about that AI? Who's regulating that one? Right, so we end up with who's watching the watchman, the watchman, the watchman.
You're just doing this to be mean to us, aren't you?
Okay.
I mean, what we did is that once Bob gave us the idea, we created a framework called Global Adaptive AI Assessment Framework, GA3, because there are 3 A's inside that title. And we published it on our website as well. It's also on our platform. And the reason that we call it adaptive is actually there are two angles on that one. One is that there is an LLM model keep searching for the AI frameworks all around the world, and when it finds one, it looks at the current ones that we have, and it's not merging, but it is updating the framework based on that new AI assessment framework in a specific region or industry, and so on and so forth. So that help us to limit the number of controls that we have in that framework. The second thing on the adaptive part is that you can scope. You can say that, hey, I want to see only these regions, these industries, give me.
So you can filter.
Yeah, you can customize the framework based on your needs. Of course, the assessment that you did for a company 1 month ago might be different. Maybe there are some new controls, some controls has changed. I think that should be fine. We need to figure out a way that it should be fine for an ongoing assessment throughout the year. The other thing is that once you have these tools in your place, you don't have to rely on annual assessments. So you can do quarterly assessments if necessary, because the technology is very
Right,
rapid.
over time, as it starts to stabilize, hopefully it'll get a little bit easier.
Yeah, and
Alright.
just as an aside, that's not something that is that we've done internally just for our customers. It's available. We've made it a global public framework, so you can go to the blackkite.com website. You can actually download it and use it in your environment in a non-commercial way. So any company that needs to figure out how to do this, it's a tool that they can use to help them do that. All the work's done
Love it.
for them.
It comes back to what we've talked about before, which is collaboration, where you got to give back
Yep.
to the world to make it safer. All right, so one last question. What is the most counterproductive compliance practice we see?
You already know my answer, questionnaires. Sending a blank questionnaire to a vendor to have them fill it out is the most counterproductive thing that anybody
Waste of time, it doesn't tell us much.
can ever do. it, you look at it. So and I remember sending out questionnaires, and you get them back, and they came back, and everything was answered perfectly, pristine. And it's okay. That's a red flag. I wonder who filled this out. They really don't know.
Right. It's like getting a SOX report with 0 findings. I go, I don't think so.
Or you ask for somebody's information security policy, and they send it back, as an artifact, and it says information security for insert your company name here.
Yeah, information security policies done right? The old Trash Crescent Wood stuff,
exactly,
which is a good starting point. But
that to me that is so unproductive, because if it was perfect, if you're sending out a questionnaire and you're asking for 500 answers and 200 artifacts and documents to support that, are you going to actually review that when you get that back? Or are you just running through a compliance check process?
Right. People are saying, "Oh, we sent out the questionnaire, we got it." They file it, and then if and when something bad happens, they go back to the questionnaire and say, "You said you did this, but clearly you didn't."
Yeah.
Okay.
So what is the optimal number of questions that you should ask to a vendor?
0.
0.
So I say that what you do is so questionnaires. What's the purpose of a questionnaire? The purpose is to find out information about a specific control. Is that control in place? Is it mature? Is it working, or is it failing? So you're just looking for information about a control. If you can find a way that you can gather that information, and today with AI, that's fairly easy to do. If you have access to the right data, it's fairly easy to do. If you can get all that information prior to that first engagement with a vendor, you can knock out 95, 98% of the questions. Now, there are some that can't be answered, obviously. Nothing's perfect. And you may have to then ask 3 questions or 4 questions or clarification. So it's kind of flipping the script. Instead of starting at 0 and trying to get somebody that doesn't know the answers to fill it out, you're using verified data. And you're blocking out all. Who cares about the yeses that the control's working?
It's the no's or I don't know.
Exactly.
It depends. Yeah. And I mean, I always ask people all the time, if you're on the vendor side and you get 2 questionnaires, one with 500 questions, one with 25, which one are you going to do? The one with 25. And that's what we need to get to. And I think we've done a great job of getting there. And I think we need to sell that conceptually to the auditors and the compliance.
I mean, as Bob pointed out, we have the cyber data, right? We have the trust centers and privacy policies. We have some external data. When you combine these things, you may have the answers for 90% of the controls that you are looking for. But I have a different question for you, Bob. As a practitioner, which side are you on? The one side is that you do the continuous monitoring and you do assessment if you see a problem on the continuous monitoring, or you only do the assessment and you see a problem, you start the continuous monitoring?
Depends.
I love his answers.
And as an advisor, I would actually have the same response, right? It depends. And I think you probably want to do both.
Well, again, that depends on what is the exposure that vendor presents to your organization. If it's low exposure, continuous monitoring isn't free, and you have to balance. Do you want to spend money to continuously monitor a vendor that has very limited financial exposure? Probably the answer is no. Do you need to assess them at some point? You should assess all vendors in some way or fashion.
Annually, every 3 years, or
Yeah, and again, it depends on the exposure. What's the exposure? If it's a high exposure, you want to continuously monitor. You want to with continuous monitoring, where it's gotten to today, actually going out and doing another assessment. You have to look at assessments differently. I'm continuously monitoring vendor A. And during that continuous, I've collected a lot of their artifacts, their trust pages connected. We have all that information coming in. A reassessment for me is going to get triggered, obviously, if something happens. For the tool that I use, Black Kite, if ransomware susceptibility index comes up, that launches a problem. So we'll look at it. We may reach out. We might do a reassessment, but If I have all that data coming in on a regular basis and it's all the same data that I get in an annual assessment, then why go out and
It's continuous rolling,
Yes.
right? And that, and I
yeah,
think
take a snapshot. So, what you want to do is you want to have baselines, obviously. So you want to have a snapshot, critical vendors, so you make sure that your regulatory compliance is met. You do that once a year. But, if you have that data already in, if the assessment's being done continuously and you can take a snapshot, it solves a tremendous workload problem.
So taking that snapshot is just to appease the auditors.
Yes.
Okay. So actually, you don't need that from a resiliency perspective if you have the rigorous continuous monitoring
Correct.
on the vendor.
Yeah,
Okay.
if all the controls that are important for that engagement, if you are collecting data points, yeah, you don't need it. Now, there may be certain things that, and again, there's so many different relationships you can have with a vendor. There might be something that you don't have access to continuously. Now, that you might have to periodically recollect that information to see if there's any changes. So there's always nuances.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Some vendors, they are very small. They have only one website, one IP address. From cyberspace, you don't have enough information to collect.
Right.
That's why you need the internal information. They don't have a trust center that you
Yeah.
can find. So for those, I think you need an assessment.
Yeah, you do. And typically those vendors are, the exposure that those vendors present are never huge. Sometimes they are. They
Yeah,
can be.
depending on the industry.
but
right?
again, that's
In
that.
retail, wholesale, something.
Yeah, that's why I always love people in the vendor space making blanket statements that we can do everything and we can automate everything. And third party is if you've ever been in an environment where you have been a third party risk management professional, you know how complicated it is. Everybody else, they think, oh, it's just TPRM. It's not complicated. You have
it used to not be complicated, but now it's ridiculous.
yeah, but it is, and it, because of technology changes and because of the relationship with vendors, and then along comes AI, and what we thought was complicated now is almost unimaginably complicated. So you have to understand that when you're building these programs.
And to be frank, the R in TPRM,
Who's Frank?
that's my middle name.
Oh,
Sorry, that's my Starbucks name. The R in TPRM is not just risk, also relation, right? Third-party relationship management. That's
like that.
That's what it goes, because everything. If you put everything into AI, if you automate everything, then you are a machine sending the information to third party. You don't have a relationship.
it's still people
Yeah.
talking to people.
We need
more than
people to talking to people, right? That you need that collaboration, because we talked about in the last episode, right? It's not a blame game. We want collaboration. We want cooperation. We want to fight against the bad actors together. So that you need to have a relationship with the vendors.
I almost just broke into song people who need people, but no one needs that. Okay, so we spent a lot of time on that. But so what about you, Ferhat? What counterproductive compliance practice do you see?
I totally agree with it. That's why, follow up with his comments. We need to change these, right now the industry is managing the questionnaire, not managing the risk. We need to change that. We need to go back to managing the risk.
Yeah, it's TPRM, not TPQM.
Exactly.
We're gonna automate questionnaire management. That's a big vendor thing today. We're automating questionnaire management. Well, wait a minute. What does that have to do with risk? And then you hear a song and
I
dance.
also know a lot of security executives are not all about that. They're like, I'm not putting my name on the bottom of a document that was filled out by AI.
Yeah.
But I have a different one that I think is maybe worthy of a minute's conversation. I think what we need to move away from is the hardline approach that some of the auditors and compliance people take, which is the rule says you must do this, you're not doing it, you got a finding. They're not looking at compensatory controls. They're not looking at mitigating controls. They're not building the relationship. And we see that typically with more junior auditors because they don't feel comfortable doing that. But I think we need to have more collaboration with the auditors and our compliance people to get to the point where, to your guys mentioned, that we're managing the risk and not just the checkbox or checklist. And I think that's an important sort of overlay.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah. We have a number of different auditors. We get audited for different stuff. And
Some of them are much more hardline than others and
Yeah.
much more rigid, and I don't think that's constructive or useful for
Well,
anybody.
it's not, because as a risk professional, every education program that you've been to, everything you've learned, compensatory controls are an integral part, because there is no program that can be perfect. There are situations where from an audit perspective, you can't actually do something. There's those cases where there's an application that the underlying server operating system, if you upgrade it or patch it, it breaks your application, which breaks your income flow. Do you have compensatory controls in place? What are they? How do those compensatory controls, mitigate that risk of not patching? That as a risk management professional, that's what you're taught. That's how you think. And you're right. You'll run across auditors that they don't think that way. Well, this is what
They frequently don't care about the business.
this is what FedRAMP says, and we don't care about anything else. You haven't met this. You're failing. But these other compensatory controls are in place. And I've been seeing some of the older auditors. They're still auditing against like you have your infrastructure in the server farm behind your office.
Well, you mentioned on a call a couple weeks ago that one of our customers asked for a SAS 70.
Yes.
Yeah. So for those of you out there that don't know, SAS 70 has been deprecated for 10 years?
No,
Longer?
since 2011.
Yeah. So replaced by SOC.
Yeah.
SOC 2, yeah.
Yeah, SSAE 19, I think is the current, but yeah, yes, and
Frightening and horrific.
well, it's when you have a process in place, and that's the problem with big third-party risk management programs. They've got a process in place that they've been using, in this case, forever, and most people, when they see that, they chuckle, and they provide the current. So, is that a problem?
But then you run up against that rigidity.
Yes.
Right. No. This says right here, I got to ask you for this.
Yeah,
There is.
and if you have a junior person doing the assessment and they don't know what that is, or that's deprecated, that is a problem, and it extends that assessment process time, and it's challenging. So that's why I talk about this. I've written about it. I blog about it. Agility. That in TPRM, the lack of agility is the biggest factor, I believe. In the numbers in a recent episode, we talked about the costs of breaches. Essentially we said it shows that it's failing. And I think lack of agility in programs is the biggest reason it's failing.
All right. Awesome. Fun conversation. We may have to cut that up into 2 episodes.
At Black Kite, we believe trust starts with transparency. You can see how every cyber risk rating is calculated and share it with vendors, execs, or regulators. See it in action at blackkite.com. That's blackkite.com.
Let's move into the research roundup section. So I have 2 pieces of, or 2 data points from World Economic Forum. So in 2024, the World Economic Forum had a meeting. 76% of CISOs in attendance said regulatory fragmentation across jurisdictions greatly impacts their ability to stay compliant. So we talked about that earlier. And then the second one is they also flag regulatory fragmentation as a top obstacle. 72% of them are saying that risk is rising while they're juggling this. So I think I'm going to sort of interpret that, and then we'll talk about it. Essentially what they're saying is they can't stay compliant because they don't know what they're staying compliant to, and they can't run their businesses because they're spending so much time and energy on compliance. So what do you guys think about that? Ferhat, let's start with you, because your team, a big chunk of what you guys are doing is bringing in all these different regulations and trying to normalize them and figure that out. So is there a solution to this?
Well, there are 2 ways to solve this problem, this regulatory fragmentation problem. One is using tools like ours, which I'm not promoting, like it's not a marketing podcast, but there are other tools like that you consume all these frameworks, and when you have all this cyber data, trust center data, privacy policy data that you can map and see, it can help. It's not the 100% solution, but it helps a lot to CISOs. But the other thing is that international collaboration. all these, governments, industries, they need to get together somehow, and they need to figure out.
Do you think there's a shot of that happening though?
You asked for a solution. I'm just giving the solution.
Oh,
I did.
no.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed you asked that with such a straight face.
I mean, I would love for that to happen. I just can't agree on anything.
There's a chance that it might not happen. Like there's a very likely chance that it might not happen, because some countries say that, hey, you need to, store your data inside the country borders, right? So you cannot generalize that rule. I'm not sure if that's a good rule, by the way. Do you think that works, like in this era, like everything is
Data
on the cloud?
residency?
Yeah.
I understand it. When I ran across that frequently when I worked at PayPal, and you had to have different countries. You had to have certain processes in place to be able to support that. And it didn't mean that it wasn't so prescriptive that the data could only reside in that country. In some countries, that it had to reside there. A duplicate, essentially. There were other countries that where it had to reside there and couldn't reside anyplace else.
But doesn't that that's driven by the regulatory fragmentation, because countries say, well, country XYZ, their privacy policy stinks, right? So if we fix the regulatory fragmentation, maybe that addresses the data residency.
Well, and the problem with that is that because of that, if it's too prescriptive, there certain countries didn't get the service because you couldn't change your processes and your systems sufficiently. You could do it easily with mitigating controls, but to make it exclusive, the processing and the data living all in one country, it was impossible to do. So that country didn't get the services. That's the problem. And I don't think that it's ever going to correlate into a global type of thing. I look at it from I have a director of GRC, and he takes a lot of stress off of me because he has to deal with a lot of this junk. And
he looks like 30 years older than when we hired him.
yeah, he does. But ISO certification. All the controls are in place. Everything is oh yeah, we could go and get ISO certified because we're doing all the things that ISO talks about. We have all the policies and procedures in place. But when you get the ISO auditor, it's like, oh well, no, you have to have these policies that are specific to ISO.
I also find that sometimes the auditors feel like they have to find something wrong to justify their time. Right. So even if it looks good, they got to. Oh well, that I's not dotted, the T's not crossed.
That's some auditors. Yeah, that's not across the whole world of auditors.
Right.
But I get that. We have an auditor in our GRC.
There's some great auditors out there that really are very good about balance.
Yes.
Well, it's funny. In the previous episode, we talked about predictions. And a couple of years ago, I wrote a predictions note that was entirely tongue-in-cheek. And one of the predictions I put out was, I think it was probably 2 years ago, so 2024 is going to be the year of global privacy regulation. And if you remember, Bob, your response to that was, my prediction is people are going to believe your predictions are real.
Yeah.
And they did. Yep. Somebody was like, you really think that's going to happen? No, I do not think that's going to happen. All right. So I think it's an ongoing problem, and I think and maybe this is where AI might be able to help us a little bit. And, we've talked a lot about collaboration and cooperation as opposed to conflict.
Yeah, but who's going to audit the AI?
Me.
Yeah, I'm flipping the question back on you.
All right, excellent. So, but take a look. This is actually one report that I did read most of. I think the World Economic Forum does some great stuff. Yes. And maybe organizations like that might be a good source for some guidance maybe about how to normalize this.
If you are watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss a single episode.
Welcome to today's episode of Judge Jeffrey. So we're going to do an agree to disagree, but we're going to do it a little bit differently this time. I am going to assign you, we're going to play debate class in school. I'm going to assign you a position. You got to defend it. You guys ready? And don't make me angry. All right. First case. compliance metrics mean nothing to attackers. Bob, you're going to take the positive. So you're going to say that metrics are actually, that attackers care about metrics, and Ferhat, you're going to say they don't.
Oh, nice.
I love it. I'm going to stop that soon.
So I've never had debate class. Who goes first? The for or the against?
Go first, Bob.
I go first. All right. So I believe that compliance metrics, as a bad actor, I can use them in a really good fashion. Especially, I love when they publish them. I love when somebody says they're ISO certified. I love seeing certifications that I'm going to go out and that'll be part of the intelligence that I gather, and they're going to tell me what I don't want to attack. I'm going to look for the gaps, and they're going to be really useful to me to identify gaps and launch attacks.
Okay. Your Honor. I've been studying threat actors for a very, very long time. I know their mindset. They don't give what do you say? Give an answer about.
A rat's tushy?
Yeah. They don't care about your certifications. They don't even look at your certifications. They find a vulnerability and they just exploit it. They find a credential, stolen credential, and they use it. They don't even know, they don't need to know your certifications, your compliance metrics at all. That's my case.
I better change hackers I'm using then.
I thought both answers were very good. I'm very impressed, Bob, because I know that's a tough decision, a tough position. But I'm actually gonna side with Ferhat on this one.
Yeah, so am I.
Yes. So Bob, you have to pay Ferhat $750,000.
Is that my fine?
Yes, Algerian dollars or Nigerian dollars. So it's not really that much money. All right. Second one. Vendors should be regulated just like banks. Ferhat,
Wait, you didn't finish the fine here. So I got to pay him a fine. I'll get you the fine, no problem. To get the account set up, you have to send me $500 in US first, and we'll have that done.
Are you the Algerian prince?
Yes,
yes, Bitcoin.
Yeah, Bitcoin. Send me Bitcoin. I need Bitcoin, and once we have the account established, I'll pay the fine. All right.
Okay, second one. Vendors should be regulated just like banks. So Ferhat, you are going to say yes, they should. And Bob, you're going to say no, they should not. You go first.
Well, why do we put all the burden on the banks? When there's a breach because of a vendor, right? I think it's too much for the banks, too much, responsibility that we are putting on the client while they are just getting service from a vendor. Vendor is the one that providing the service. They need to be responsible for their security, and the way that to make them aware of security is make them compliant. So the regulators also, should look into the vendors. Vendors should be regulated just like banks.
All right, I'm confused. I feel like you argued both sides of that.
No,
All right, then it's just me.
Yeah.
All right, I did not sleep well last night. All right, Bob.
I think this is a horrible idea. Regulating vendors, what are you trying to do? You're trying to crush innovation. You're trying to take the little pop-ups, the new startups, and you're trying to put them out of business and add regulatory compliance on them before they even have a chance to get started. It is going to be horrible out there. We're going to have to we're going to be stuck using things like WordPerfect and applications from decades ago. That's
You
what
just showed your age, Bob. Perfect.
Yeah, I know.
Although so did I, because I know what you're talking
Yeah, but
about.
there's other ones I could have said too.
WordStar.
Yeah.
From Wang Computer Corporation.
Yeah, but seriously, I think that is more self-regulated than a need for regulations like the banks, and here's why. Vendors are competing for business, and today, cybersecurity is a differentiator in companies. Most third-party programs are looking at cybersecurity maturity in companies and vendors that they're going to use. So that's a self-regulation. You have to do it in order to get the business.
Okay, Ferhat, you got to give the money back to Bob.
Oh my.
I'm going to play a zero-sum game here. All right. I think this one's interesting because it comes back to what we've talked about a bunch of times, which is accountability, right? Who is held accountable when standard of due care is not met? And we're actually seeing some of it. DORA out of the EU is doing a little bit of regulatory around third parties, although they seem to be struggling gathering all of the data. I think we're seeing it with some of the repositories. I think, again, not to talk too much about Black Kite, but the Black Kite Bridge actually enables us to facilitate some of this. It's not regulatory, but it's a centralized repository for, here's a question that 50 people are asking you. You only should have to answer it once. So I like that one. Okay. Number 3, regulation is the only reason boards care about risk. So Bob is going to argue, yes, it is the only reason, and Ferhat's going to say it is not the only reason. So Ferhat, I'm going to let you go first again.
Okay, this is a tough one. Just give me a second.
I got confidence in you.
Well, boards, they care about risk because of the financial outcomes. It's not the regulations. If there's no regulation, they will still care about the risk if you show them that the financial outcome is too much, right? If, let's say that you are not in a heavily regulated industry, and as a CISO, I come to board and say that, hey, if we don't take these, measures, then we will hit by this much of data breach and that will cost us this, then that board will care about risk. So even though there's no regulations, there's a way to make the board care about risk.
That's good. You got a tough road here, Bob. Go ahead.
So first, a disclaimer. Any board members that I know or don't know, anything I'm about to say is made up because I'm being forced to do this by Judge Jeffrey. That's my disclaimer. So, yeah, that's the only thing they care about. It's all, self-aggrandization, compliance. If there's a compliance violation, who gets the fine? Who gets in trouble? It all goes back to the board. So they don't really care about anything other than their own self-serving use. Again, please, disclaimer. That's because Jeffrey made me say that.
All right, Bob, pay it for hot. All right, and then the final one, and we actually kind of talked about this. I actually particularly like all 4 of these. I think they're really interesting kind of conversations. And I'm a big fan of forcing people to come at it from the opposite end because I think it helps us hone our thought processes. So the 4th and final one, fines don't fix bad security. So Bob, you say they do. Fines fix bad security.
Good luck with that.
Nice.
Okay, so
I want to try to break this thing before we're done.
yeah, so fines fix bad security. If there wasn't something monetary, if there wasn't something financial that people stood to risk when they're doing bad things, they would just go ahead and do those bad things. You have to have it in place. You have to hit them where it hurts, and hitting them in the pocketbook is where it hurts. So fines are a good thing.
Show me
Big fines.
Big fines. Fine them into oblivion.
Billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars. If you put them out of business, that's a good thing because they're never going to have a...
Security won't be bad.
They're not going to have any security at all. They're out of business, so fines are a good thing.
Show me one case that fines fix the bad security.
That is not fair. But actually, I'd like to hear an answer.
I've got to go back a few years, and this the only thing I can think of is that I remember a company that had a bad burglar alarm system that used to go off in the middle of the night, and law enforcement, we'd have to respond to it all the time until an ordinance got passed that for false alarms you got fined, and the fines cost more than it was to fix the alarm system, so it fixed it. So there, I had one for you.
That's not a cybersecurity.
But it is risk, and I actually like that as an example. And I've been fined because we forgot the passcode on my alarm company, but that's a different story. So this is a really interesting one because I think that there needs to be some punishment if you are found not in compliance. Back to what we talked about, I think there needs to be a sliding scale, though. Here, if you want to hammer on Mason, so I'm going to top down.
Oh, sure.
If you watch your thumb. But I do think that's got to be a sliding scale. The fines need to be significant enough that they drive people to act. If you're telling me I got to spend $1 million on security and the fine's going to be $6, I'll eat the fines.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's a risk-based decision.
Right. And the metaphor I talk about all the time, when I lived in New Jersey, and if there are any police out there, this is not a true thing. When I lived in New Jersey, I knew I could drive 10 miles an hour over the speed limit before getting pulled over. When I moved down to Florida, it's more like 20, right? And that's a risk management decision based on a different risk appetite and a different scenario. And I do think we need to come up with some mechanism for finding at an appropriate level. You know, you find a $100 billion company $1 million, that's a very different impact than finding a $10 million company $1 million. And that's something actually that DORA has done a pretty good job of. The requirements for smaller companies are lower and the fines are lower. So I think that's an interesting thing. Oh my God, that was so fun. I'm going to take that home with me and I'm going to walk around my house. My bet is my wife, hi honey, will take that away from me in about 4 seconds.
And she should.
Yes. So again, we'd be interested to hear all of your thoughts. So, you know, wherever you're listening or watching, put some comments, any thoughts you have on regulating vendors. I think that was probably the most interesting one. Your thoughts on fines, especially if you've been fined and you want to reach out to it directly, please do that. So thanks again for joining us for Judge Jeffrey. Ba-dun-dun. Is that the sound?
No clue.
Ferhat, give me a bang.
Sure.
Case dismissed.
We've got a lot more coming. New conversations, sharper debates, more gavel, and topics that are already stirring things up in the cyber and risk worlds. Stay tuned or you get the hammer. Subscribe wherever you listen. We'll see you in the next episode. Remember, cybersecurity doesn't thrive in the shadows. It demands daylight. Until next time.